I was 7 months pregnant, carrying groceries up 3 flights of stairs when my best friend called and said, "Why did you lie about losing your job?" I said, "What are you talking about?" She sent a screenshot, my husband bragging about free housing while I sit around and pretend to be pregnant. Tears fell. I knocked on his door and said, "Let's see if you can fake being a father in court." My name is Mara. I'm 34. I live in Astoria, Queens, 3rd floor of an old walk-up with narrow stairs that seem to get steeper every time I go up. When this all started, I was 7 months pregnant, exhausted, bloated, and balancing my life between hope and survival. My husband, Lucas, and I had been married for 3 years. We weren't perfect, but I thought we were solid. I used to teach preschool at a little place on Ditmars Boulevard. I loved those kids like they were my own. But budget cuts hit us hard, and they let me go 2 months after I found out I was pregnant. Since then, I'd been cobbling together part-time tutoring gigs online to keep us afloat. Lucas worked construction management. Freelance, mostly. One day it'd be a half-renovated building in Long Island City, the next it was something in Bed-Stuy. He said it kept him busy. He said he was working. I believed him. That Thursday, it was early October. I remember the weather vividly. Crisp air, low sun, the kind of fall day that makes you want to drink something hot and spicy and sit by a window. I just finished hauling 2 overflowing bags of groceries up 3 flights of stairs. No elevator, of course. The building was built in the 60s and probably hadn't been updated since. By the time I got inside, I was soaked in sweat, even though it was barely 60 degrees outside. My back felt like it was going to snap in half. The baby Jonah, though we didn't have a name picked back then, had been pressing down so hard that my hips ached all the time. But I didn't complain. Not out loud. That day, I just groaned, dropped the bags on the kitchen table, and slumped into a chair. My phone buzzed. Calle. Calle has been my best friend since college. We met in a dorm laundry room in Albany, bonded over the fact that both of us had managed to shrink our favorite sweaters on the same day. She's blunt, loyal, fiercely intelligent, and has no tolerance for bullshit. "Hey," I answered, out of breath. "I just dragged 20 pounds of produce up a mountain. Can I call you back after I ice my spine?" She didn't laugh. Instead, she said, "Why did you lie about losing your job?" I blinked. "What? Why did you lie about losing your job?" She repeated. Her tone was cold. Accusatory. What are you talking about?" I didn't lie. I got laid off in July. I got a screenshot. I didn't want to believe it. "But Mara," she sighed, "I think you need to see this." And then she texted it to me. I opened the message, expecting maybe some joke or meme I wouldn't get. But what I saw stopped me cold. It was a Reddit post, someone named Rebuild Rocker 89. A private subreddit for people in real estate, apparently. The post said, "Free rent's the dream, right? All you gotta do is marry someone gullible and lazy, tell the landlord she's pregnant and unemployed so you qualify for hardship extensions. She sits around all day claiming back pain while I bust my ass. No kid coming. No job lost. Just a long con that works." I sat there and reread it. Once, twice, 3 times. I couldn't breathe. "Calle," I said quietly. That can't be him." "It's him," she replied, voice shaking a little. "He used your name in the comments. Someone saw it and sent it to me because they recognized it. They thought I should know." And then, as if summoned by the universe, a new text came in. A screenshot of a comment under that post. "My wife Mara's out of work and we're expecting, so they had no choice but to grant us the extension. Women get away with M. Rider in the system." I felt my throat tighten. My vision blurred. My stomach lurched so violently I thought I'd throw up. I stood up, not sure how, waddled down the hall like I was sleepwalking. I stopped outside the room Lucas had turned into his office, really just a desk, 2 monitors, and a mini fridge full of energy drinks. I knocked. He opened the door, half a sandwich in one hand, phone in the other. "Yeah?" I held up the phone. He glanced at it, blinked, then looked at me. "It's not what it looks like," he said, too quickly. I didn't scream. I didn't sob. I just whispered, "Let's see if you can fake being a father in court." I turned around and walked away. He didn't follow. That night, he slept in the office. I lay on the couch, stomach hard as stone, hands trembling. I didn't sleep. The next morning, Calle showed up with bagels, orange juice, and a look of fury in her eyes. "I hope you're not still thinking about staying," she said the second she walked in. "I'm thinking about what happens next," I told her. "Well," she said, slapping down a manila folder, "that's why I made a call. Meet Arthur. Arthur Baines. 60-something, semi-retired attorney, worked housing and family law in NYC for decades. Calle knew his daughter. He offered to talk to me free of charge, just to help me sort my head. I met Arthur at a cafe in Long Island City. He listened while I told him everything. About the post. About Lucas. About the pregnancy. About how I wasn't sure what to do next. He stirred his coffee slowly and said, "You're not the first woman I've met whose husband turns out to be a scammer once a baby's on the way. But you might be the first one who has receipts this good." He told me to stay put until we could make sure Lucas couldn't kick me out or do anything drastic. My name was on the lease, thankfully. Lucas had added me 6 months ago when our landlord required a co-signer for the lease renewal. Arthur told me to start compiling everything, messages, bank statements, anything unusual. That night, I opened our shared laptop and started digging. I found Venmo transfers to someone named J_Minx. Frequent. Hundreds of dollars. I opened the messages and my stomach dropped. Jenna. Real name probably something else. But the messages told me everything. Flirty, explicit, loaded with "can't wait to see you again" and "she'll never know." I printed everything. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I began packing my essentials, my documents, my laptop, clothes for me and the baby, the ultrasound pictures. Calle came by the next night and helped carry things to her car. She had already arranged for me to stay at her place until I could find something stable. Lucas barely noticed. He didn't ask where I was going. Didn't stop me. Just sat on the couch, scrolling his phone like the world was fine. I filed for separation 2 days later. Arthur started the custody paperwork the following week. Lucas exploded when he got the papers. Said I was overreacting, that it was all a joke, that I was ruining his life over some Reddit crap. I told him, "You ruined your own life." "I'm just trying to protect mine." He tried to guilt me. Said I was breaking up a family. That he'd fight for joint custody. I told him good luck explaining the screenshots to a judge. He didn't believe me. Until the court summons showed up. And still, somehow, it only got worse. He started calling constantly after that. Middle of the night, random times during the day, always the same pattern, first a pleading voice, trying to talk his way back in, and when that didn't work, it turned nasty. Threats. Gaslighting. "You'll regret this," or "No judge is going to take a kid from their father for an online joke," or the one that almost made me laugh in disbelief, "I made you who you are." I stopped answering. Calle blocked his number from my phone herself after she saw a voicemail where he shouted for 2 minutes about how this wasn't fair to him. In the meantime, I went to every prenatal appointment alone. Not that he'd ever really shown up before. But something about sitting in those quiet waiting rooms surrounded by other women with excited partners made me feel so deeply, unshakably hollow. I'd watch a man put his hand on his wife's belly and smile, and I'd want to cry, not because I envied them, but because I knew I had that once, or thought I did. Now I wasn't even sure what was real anymore. The worst part wasn't the heartbreak. It was the unraveling of trust. I didn't even know how long he'd been lying. Was the baby ever something he wanted? Did he mean anything he said during those long talks late at night when we daydreamed about being parents? It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about having the floor ripped out from under me. Arthur was methodical, calm. He helped me file a restraining order, not because Lucas had been violent, but because the harassment was escalating. He sent me 37 text messages in a single afternoon after I posted a photo of a baby onesie on my private Instagram. I hadn't tagged him. Hadn't even mentioned him. But I guess he was still watching. "Why do you want people to think I'm a deadbeat?" one of the texts said. I didn't answer. But I thought about it. I didn't want anyone to think anything. I just wanted peace. I wanted to be able to bring Jonah into a world that wasn't tainted by fear or manipulation. And I wanted to understand how I had gotten here. Was it me? Did I ignore signs? Did I make excuses for him too many times? There were flashes I'd buried, like how he never seemed to care much about baby shopping. How he didn't ask to come to the ultrasounds. How he rolled his eyes when I started nesting, buying used baby furniture and washing tiny socks in the sink like they were precious heirlooms. And the money. God, the money. I'd asked him once about a $1,200 cash withdrawal, and he'd said it was for equipment at a job site. But now, looking back with clearer eyes, I remembered how he changed the subject fast. How he got defensive. How his tone darkened just enough to make me back off. And then there was the night I caught him laughing at something on his phone, and when I asked what it was, he turned the screen over and muttered, "Just stupid guy stuff." I should have looked. But I didn't. Because when you're tired and pregnant and trying so hard to believe the person you love has your back, you let things go. Too many things. By the time November rolled around, the pregnancy was weighing on every part of me. Jonah was sitting low, which meant walking hurt, sleeping was impossible, and I had to pee every 25 minutes. Calle and her roommate, Priya, were saints. They never made me feel like a burden. They even helped me set up a tiny corner of the spare room with Jonah's bassinet and a shelf for diapers and wipes. But I still felt homeless. I wasn't. I had people. I had support. But it didn't feel like mine. Lucas, on the other hand, went silent. For a while. Then, one Friday morning, I opened my email and found a long message from him. It was classic Lucas, flowery, manipulative, full of just enough half-truths to feel confusing if you didn't know better. He said he missed me. That he knew he'd messed up. That he wanted to be there for Jonah. That we could work things out if I just gave him a chance to explain. That the Reddit stuff was exaggerated for internet points and taken out of context. I didn't reply, but I showed Arthur. He didn't say much, just sighed and added it to the pile. When the court date came for the first hearing on custody, Lucas actually showed up. Wearing a wrinkled dress shirt and jeans, no tie. He hadn't shaved. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't that. He looked tired. Thin. Nervous. He smiled at me in the hallway. Like we were old friends bumping into each other after years. "Mara," he said softly. "You look good." I just blinked at him. I hadn't seen him in person since I walked out of our apartment. He opened his arms like he was expecting a hug. I turned away. The hearing was short, procedural. But Lucas tried to speak. Told the judge he was shocked I had left so suddenly. Said he'd been under stress. That his Reddit post was just a satire of exaggerated husband frustration and not meant to be taken literally. The judge looked at him for a long moment and said, "You called your wife lazy and said her pregnancy was fake. You claimed the child didn't exist. How exactly should the court interpret that?" Lucas stammered. "It was a persona." She raised an eyebrow. "A persona?" He nodded eagerly. "Yeah, like a character." I didn't mean any of it. Arthur stood up then and handed the judge the screenshots. The messages. The Venmo receipts. Even the messages to Jenna. The judge didn't even look surprised. The hearing ended with temporary full custody granted to me. Lucas was told he could file for visitation after completing parenting classes and submitting to a financial review. The judge told him, in no uncertain terms, that his online activity had severely undermined his credibility. Outside the courthouse, he followed me to the parking lot. "Mara, please," he said, reaching out. "Don't do this." "I didn't do this," I replied. "You did." "I can be better," he insisted. "You don't have to do this alone." I looked at him for what felt like the first real time in years. And I realized, in that moment, I had no idea who he really was. I knew the man I married. I remembered the good mornings and late-night Chinese food and the way he kissed my forehead when I couldn't sleep. But the man standing in front of me? He was a stranger. I got in the car. And I drove away. That was the last time I saw him in person. For a while, anyway. He didn't disappear completely, of course. Men like Lucas don't just walk away quietly. He lingered in the background, passive-aggressive emails, sporadic attempts to check in, messages on Facebook that ranged from sugary sweet to bitter and blaming, sometimes all in the same paragraph. One time, he even sent a bouquet to Calle's apartment. A big, obnoxious arrangement of lilies and white roses with a note that read, "For the woman I never stopped loving. Let's start over, for Jonah's sake." Calle opened the door when the delivery guy buzzed, took one look at the flowers, and said, "Absolutely not." She handed them back without a second glance. "Return to sender," she muttered, then slammed the door. Another time, he sent a long email with photos of a crib he claimed to have built himself. It looked like something off Etsy, probably cost $500. "Proof I'm ready to be a father," the subject line said. As if furniture was going to undo everything. I was almost 8.5 months along when my OB finally sat me down and said, "Mara, you're showing signs of stress-induced hypertension. We need to talk about inducing early if it doesn't stabilize." I nodded, tears threatening to fall right there in her office. "I don't want to scare you," she said gently, "but this kind of stress, it's not good for either of you. Your baby needs calm. You need rest. Support." I laughed bitterly. "Yeah, I'm working on that." She gave me a long look. "Whatever's going on at home, Mara, you're not alone. Not unless you choose to be." The truth was, even with Calle and Priya and Arthur in my corner, I felt more alone than ever. There's a unique kind of loneliness that comes from grieving someone who's still alive, someone you thought you knew, someone who was supposed to stand beside you through this very moment. I hadn't told my parents the full story. They live in upstate New York, Saratoga Springs, and while we're close in that strained adult-child kind of way, I hadn't found the words to explain what happened. They knew I was staying with a friend. Knew Lucas and I were having issues. But not the Reddit post. Not the lies. Not the affair. Not the court. I didn't want to hear the disappointment in my dad's voice. Didn't want to see the worry in my mom's eyes. I wanted to protect them, which in hindsight was ridiculous. They were the ones who should have been protecting me. But I'd been pretending to be strong for so long, I didn't know how to ask for help anymore. Jonah came early. I went into labor on a Tuesday morning, cold, rainy, gray skies that made everything outside feel like a dull memory. Calle drove me to the hospital while I sat in the passenger seat breathing through contractions and squeezing her hand so hard I left marks. "You got this," she kept saying. "You're a warrior. He's going to be beautiful." She stayed with me the entire time. 12 hours. Not once did she leave the room. Not for coffee, not for a break. When it got bad, when I cried out and said I couldn't do it anymore, she looked me in the eyes and said, "Yes, you can. And you are." And when Jonah was born red-faced, wailing, angry at the world, she was the one who cut the cord. I remember looking at him for the first time and thinking, how did I ever think you weren't real? He was perfect. A week later, Lucas emailed again. This time it was a photo of a teddy bear and a caption that said, "Can I meet him?" I didn't reply. Arthur filed the official custody paperwork 2 days later. We included a full documentation of his online behavior, screenshots, missed checkups, the absence at birth, the financial manipulation. It was all there in black and white. Lucas responded by filing a motion for joint custody. The hearing was scheduled for December. When the day came, Jonah was 6 weeks old. I wore a sweater dress and carried him in a sling across my chest, his tiny head tucked under my chin. He was quiet through most of it, sleeping, one little hand wrapped around my shirt collar like he didn't want me to go anywhere. Lucas showed up with a new haircut and a shiny lawyer who looked like he specialized in getting men out of alimony payments. He tried to paint a picture of redemption. Said he'd been taking online parenting classes. Had cleaned up his online presence. That he had a nursery ready and waiting. That he deserved a chance. Arthur stood up calmly and passed the judge a thick folder. "Your Honor," he said, "my client isn't here to deny Mr. Radley the right to be a father. She's here to ensure that fatherhood is earned through action, not just performance. Mr. Radley has not demonstrated any reliable history of caregiving, emotional support, or partnership during her pregnancy. He posted online about faking it for housing benefits. He implied the pregnancy was a scam. He admitted to another relationship while my client was carrying their child." The judge took her time. She asked questions, listened closely, and then said, "Given the context and the ongoing pattern of instability, I'm granting full physical and legal custody to the mother. The father may file for supervised visitation after completing an in-person parenting program and providing proof of a stable, child-friendly residence." Case closed. Lucas didn't say anything. Not to me. Not to the judge. Not to Jonah. He just walked out of the courtroom like someone had turned off his battery. That night, I sat on the floor of Calle's living room with Jonah on my chest and a cup of cold tea beside me, and I cried, not because I was sad or happy or angry, but because everything finally caught up to me. All the pretending, all the survival, all the pain I'd been keeping locked up so tightly, it just broke open. Calle didn't say anything. She just sat beside me and rubbed my back in small circles. "You're safe now," she said quietly. "You did it." But I didn't feel like I'd done anything. I felt like I'd crawled through fire and come out with half my soul burned off. There was no celebration. No triumph. Just silence. And a tiny heartbeat pressed against mine. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and trying to learn who I was now. Not just as a mother, but as Mara without Lucas. It was harder than I'd expected. I had to rebuild everything. My confidence. My credit. My sense of what it meant to trust someone. Jonah became my anchor. Every coo, every sleepy sigh, every tiny fist that reached for me in the dark reminded me why I had fought so hard. Lucas faded into the background after the custody hearing. For a while, anyway. He didn't complete the parenting class. He didn't submit the proof of residence. He sent 2 letters, handwritten, full of hollow apologies and manipulative nonsense. "I miss what we had. We were good before all the pressure. And the worst one. I forgive you." Calle read them before I did. She handed them to me with a raised eyebrow. "You don't have to read this trash." But I did. Not because I wanted him back. Not because I believed a word of it. I just wanted to understand the depth of his self-delusion. And when I finished the second letter, I finally stopped asking myself, why did he do this? And started asking, why did I let him? And that's when the real healing started. In April, just after Jonah turned 6 months, I went back to work. Part-time at first, at a small private preschool that offered on-site childcare. The director, Elena, was a kind older woman who had once been through a divorce of her own. She gave me a shot when most places didn't want to deal with a single mom with a newborn. "You've got fire in your eyes," she said during the interview. "And kids need that kind of woman around them." I took the job, and with it, a little piece of myself returned. The revenge part? That came later. And I didn't have to lift a finger. See, a few weeks after I got back to work, Arthur gave me a call. "I thought you'd want to know," he said, sounding pleased in a quiet way. "There's been some fallout." Turns out Lucas's Reddit post had made the rounds. Someone from a tenant advocacy group had shared it on Twitter. Then a few bloggers picked it up. Then a podcast episode, one of those investigative relationship ones, featured the story of a man who scammed housing benefits by pretending his wife was pregnant and unemployed. And Lucas, of course, had used the same username across multiple platforms. One sharp-eyed listener connected the dots, found his old construction portfolio online, and blasted it hard. Within a month, he lost his last client. One company dropped him entirely, citing professional misconduct. Another apparently ghosted him after the story started getting traction. And because he'd never officially separated his personal and professional brand, everything crashed at once. His name became a cautionary tale in online housing forums. Don't be a Lucas. Even landlords started using it. Karma had done the work for me. I never gloated publicly. I didn't post about it. Didn't even comment when friends sent me links. I just kept my head down, raised Jonah, and worked like hell to build something stable. But I did have one moment, just one, that I allowed myself to savor. It was early June. I was walking home from the preschool with Jonah on my hip, and I saw Lucas across the street, sitting alone at a bus stop. No car, no bags, just him, in an old hoodie, staring at the ground. He looked up, saw me, froze. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just adjusted Jonah on my hip, kissed his forehead, and kept walking. And it felt so damn good. Because real revenge isn't ruining someone. It's showing them you didn't need them to thrive. Lucas tried to destroy my life with lies, manipulation, and cowardice. But in the end, I got the one thing he never will, a child who knows what love looks like. A home built on truth. And a future I fought for with everything I had. I'm not angry anymore. I'm free. And that's more than enough.